Hi everyone, this is Mary and welcome to Super STEAM at Home Senior Edition. Well, today is our Gumdrop Engineering Challenge. We are going to try to design a structure using the materials from our kit. So we've got 10 gumdrops and 20 toothpicks, and we've got a base that's a paper plate that our structure is going to stand on. Using those materials, we're going to try to design a structure that stands up for 10 seconds, but also can support something that's heavier than the structure is, something that's more than its own weight. I'm going to use a hardcover book. Okay? So besides your materials that you've gotten, you're also going to get a data sheet in your kit, and that's going to have your basic rules on it, but also some space for you to record data about your experiment. And from home, you can supply a ruler or a yardstick and some kind of timer, kitchen timer or a phone, just to make sure that your building stays standing for at least 10 seconds. Okay, well, before we get started, I wanted to think a little bit about the kind of forces that your structure is going to have to withstand in order to support that heavier object, that book. Okay? All structures in nature, or built structures, have to withstand a couple of different forces. One of them is called compression. It's kind of a squishing, pushing force. And one of them is called tension. It's a stretching, pulling force. Okay, so if we think of pulling a rubber band, that's tension. It's all stretched out tight. If we think of squishing a sponge, if we made a building out of sponges and we had a heavy roof, that would squish down that sponge, and that's compression. Okay? And a couple of examples are if you're hanging from a jungle gym by your arms, do you think that's tension? Is that being stretched out? Or is that compression, being pushed together? It's going to be tension, right? And Superman here, holding up the world, is that compression as that leans down on him? Or is that tension? Is he being stretched out? It's compression, right? All right, and here's one more. Here's someone doing preparing to run probably, and doing a little exercising, pushing against the wall, but also stretching her leg. So what do you think we've got here? Pushing against the wall, I think that's compression. Stretching out her leg, that seems like it would be tension, right? So it matters a lot what kind of materials we use when we build and how well those stand up to tension or compression. I've got a little column I made here out of Play-Doh. So let's say there's some forces of tension being exerted on that Play-Doh. So it's going to stretch, kind of like the rubber band, stretches out, but eventually it's going to break apart. It's not really made to withstand that much tension. What about compression? Let's say it has a heavy roof on it. It's not going to stand up very well to that either. It's going to squish down. Okay, so the materials we use to make our building that's pretty important when it comes to withstanding tension and compression. But the other thing that's important is how the building is designed, because everything has tension and compression, but a building needs to keep those two forces in balance. It needs to balance out the tension with compression. And we know what our materials are. We don't have a lot of choices in that. It's going to be gumdrops and toothpicks. So we have to use a design that's going to be able to handle those compression forces and also tension forces, okay? Because what is that heavy object? It's going to be compressing our structure, right? And the way our structure is joined together, it's going to be toothpicks joined together with gumdrops. There's going to be some forces pulling on those to want to pull those apart. So we need to keep the pulling and the pushing forces in balance. And there are some basic geometric shapes that we can see in buildings around us that help us do that. So we know that every structure is affected by tension and compression. Architects and engineers have to design buildings so that they can balance these forces and distribute them equally throughout the building. And there are several types of supports that allow them to do this. A support is something that helps a building stay up and remain stable. I thought we'd take a quick look at some of the types of supports that architects use. So here is a building in Chicago. This is the Ida B. Wells home. It's a historic site. And we can see that one of the supports that this house uses is arches. Okay, and arches are supports that allow forces to be directed towards the middle. Okay, and that helps the building stay up. This is the Fourth Presbyterian Church on Michigan Avenue, and we can see that that uses arches as well. Now this is the Elk Veterans Memorial in Lincoln Park, and it uses a dome, which is really just a bunch of arches kind of lined up right next to each other, and it uses columns, and here's an arch down here, in order to support its weight. Okay, and we're not going to do anything really with arches or columns or domes today because we're building with toothpicks and with gumdrops, and those are not really round shapes that would lend themselves to this type of support. So we're going to be looking for to try to use some other types of support. Now here's a different type of support. Do you recognize this building? The John Hancock building in Chicago? And we can see that there are a bunch of diamonds all up the outside of this building. And if we look closely at these diamonds though, we can see that right across the middle of a diamond runs a beam, runs a line all the way across. And what that beam does is cut that diamond in half and cut it into triangle shapes. Okay, so this is a building that has a lot of triangle shapes all over it. This is the All Saints Episcopal Church. It's a very old church, and we see triangles here too. Here's a diamond too in the window. But we see triangle shapes in several places, and we also see rectangles. Okay? Recognize the Willis Tower in Chicago? And what's the dominant shape there? Lots of rectangles. And this is just a little old firehouse in Chicago. And that seems to be also rectangles, squares, and more rectangles. And you may have seen Lake Point Tower when you're driving along Lakeshore Drive. And that's really kind of a big triangle. It's a triangle with curved corners. Okay. And another type of triangle that's used for a structure, you don't see this in Chicago, but you'll see it if you go camping. It's a tent. Okay? And that is a basic triangle. So you can see there are a lot of different shapes that help us keep our buildings staying up and keep them strong. I want you to think about those shapes when you build with your toothpicks and your gumdrops, and think about what shape's going to give your building the strength to stay up for at least 10 seconds, and also the strength to hold a book or some other item that's considerably heavier than the weight of the building itself. Okay, I'm going to let you think about this and then do your building, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, how did your structures do? Did you use your data sheet to record how many of each shape you had in your structure and how it did in the test when you put something heavy on it, like a book? It doesn't have to be super heavy, but it needs to be considerably heavier than the structure itself, and these are very light. Okay, so I tried a few things. I did a simple cube with only using 8 jelly beans, so I still had 2 left over. And also, I believe I only used 12 toothpicks, so I had those left over. And I'm going to test and see how that did. I'm going to put a piece of paper down so I don't get my book sticky. And I'm going to let go of it. I've got my timer here. Okay, well that did not hold up well at all. You see what happened to it? Kind of pancaked. Just slid over to the side and collapsed. So that was not a success. Then I thought, well, triangles are very strong shapes because a triangle distributes the weight on top of it between the points and the base. So it's very stable. It distributes that weight evenly all along the triangle. So I thought, well, why don't I make this is like a little truss. If you've ever seen a bridge like this, it's called a truss. It's a bunch of triangles connected together. We've got some straight lines on top, kind of a square, but we've got, and squares on the bottom, but we've got these triangles along the side. And I thought, well, that feels pretty strong. And that used all of my gumdrops, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Not all of my toothpicks, but all my gumdrops. So I thought, well, maybe that will hold up better. So I'm going to put my paper down, and I'm going to put my book down, and I'm going to let go of it and start my timer. Okay, that did not do any better, did it? Same thing happened to that. It just pancaked together. It slid over to the side and was not able to support that weight. So you may have made structures that are different from mine, maybe more successful than these two. Let me show you the other one I made. And this one, I used all my jelly beans, and I also used all my toothpicks. Okay, and this is a bunch of triangles, kind of like that truss, all connected together, but there's several of them. There's actually 10 of them, and the shape on the top and the bottom is a pentagon. Okay. 5 points. So I used all my supplies for this one, and let's see how it does. I'm going to reset my timer. I'm going to get this stuff out of the way, put my paper down, and put my book on there and start my timer. So far, so good. You able to, hopefully you can see that. Okay, and that stood up for quite a while, well longer than 10 seconds. And it still seems to be okay. So for me, this was the structure that worked the best. You may have found a different structure that worked great. If you'd like to email me the structure you made and let me know how it worked, you can send me an email at youthservices@olpl.org. Okay, and I hope you enjoyed our Gumdrop Challenge today, and we will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.